The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I am here, although my beard is gone, and there is just so much to talk about today that I will not waste time talking about shaving over the weekend. There was this totally insane Republican debate at the very end of last week. I really can't tell who got the better of each other. Was it Donald Trump? Was it Marco Rubio? Was it Ted Cruz? Definitely wasn't Kasich or Ben Carson. They were barely asked any questions, actually. I'm going to play a couple clips for you. I had people emailing me saying, David, Donald Trump crushed Marco Rubio. Look at what he did. Look at how he embarrassed him when Rubio tried to take him down on hiring undocumented immigrants. And then people emailed me and they said, Marco Rubio, for the first time in this race, made Donald Trump look like an idiot on that stage. I don't actually know who got the best of whom here. Let's watch it play out. Here is some of the video. I am not sure. We'll watch, we will listen, and we will analyze.
Mr. Trump, well, first of all, self-deportation is people are going to leave as soon as they see others going out. If you look at Dwight Eisenhower in the 1950s, they started moving people out and the rest of them left. Self-deportation, as I really define it, and that's the way I define it, is you're going to get some to go and the rest are going to go out. As far as the people that I've hired in various parts of Florida during the absolute prime season, like Palm Beach and other locations, you could not get help. It's the up season. People didn't want to have part-time jobs. They were part-time jobs, very seasonal, 90-day jobs, 120-day jobs, and you couldn't get. Everybody agrees with me on that. They were part-time jobs. You needed them, or we just might as well close the doors because you couldn't get help in those hot sections of Florida.
My point that I made was that you had criticized Mitt Romney for self-deportation. You said that his strategy of self-deportation is why he lost the election. And I think Florida would be surprised because, in fact, the article that was today, they interviewed a number of people that would have been willing to do those jobs if you had been willing to hire them to do it.
I criticize Mitt Romney for losing the election. He should have won that election. He had a failed president. He ran a terrible campaign. He was a terrible candidate. That's what I criticize Mitt Romney.
Well,
I mean, he ran one terrible campaign. That's an election that should have been won.
Well, in fact, I agree we should have won, and I wish we would have. But in fact, you did criticize him for using the term self-deportation. I mean, that's on the record, and people can look it up right now online. But again, I just want to reiterate, I think it's really important, this point. I think it's fine. It's an important point that you raise, and we discuss on immigration. This is a big issue for Texas, a huge issue for the country. But I also think that if you're going to claim that you're the only one that lifted this into the campaign, that you acknowledge that, for example, you're the only person on the stage that's ever been fined for hiring people to work on your projects illegally. You hired some workers from Poland.
I'm the only one on the stage that's hired people. You haven't hired anybody.
Wow.
In fact, some of the people he hired.
Burn.
Well, but hold on.
I've hired, and by the way, I've hired tens of thousands of people over my job. You've hired
1,000 people
You've
from
had
another
nothing
company,
but problems
from another
with your
country.
credit cards, etc.
Let me say, let me finish the statement. This is important.
You haven't hired one
He
person
hired
in your life.
workers from Poland, and he had to pay $1 million or so in a judgment.
That's wrong.
That's a fact.
Totally wrong.
Well, people can look it up. I'm sure people are Googling it right now. Look it up.
Cruz.
Trump Polish workers. You'll see $1 million for hiring illegal workers on one of his projects. Yeah, he did it.
Wrong. You know, it's interesting.
That happened.
I've hired tens of thousands of people over my lifetime. Tens of thousands.
Many from other countries instead of hiring Americans.
Be quiet. Let me talk.
Okay, so that's good for that one. So then Trump tries to go after Marco Rubio about those financial decisions. Marco Rubio has made some less than ideal personal finance decisions in his past. And when Trump does that, Rubio goes really negative. Check this out.
Here's the guy that buys a house for $179,000. He sells it to a lobbyist who's probably here for $380,000, and then legislation is passed. You tell me about this guy. This is what we're going to have.
Here's the guy that inherited $200 million. If he hadn't inherited $200 million, you know where Donald Trump would be right now? Selling watches in Manhattan.
That is so wrong. We'll work on that. I took $1 million and I turned it into
$1
$10 billion. I borrowed $1
Then
million.
release the tax return so he can see how much money he
I
makes.
borrowed $1 million. I turned it into $10 billion, more than $10 billion.
Yeah, so it is true that Trump started his business with a $1 million loan from his dad, which obviously most people would never even be privileged to get a $1 million loan before you have any business success or assets to show for yourself. But he also did receive an inheritance. It's sort of one of these things where he got the inheritance, Lewis, but that's not what he started the business with, supposedly. And then here is the sort of pinnacle of the entire thing. This is my favorite just gong show moment, maybe from the entire Republican primary debates. Trump calls Rubio a choke artist and Cruz a liar. And then Ben Carson, this is just the best, asks for someone to attack him so that he can even get into this debate, which he barely was.
I mean, first of all, this guy's a choke artist and this guy's a liar. You have a combination. You have a combination of factors. He can't do it for the obvious reason, and he can't do it because he doesn't know how to tell the truth. Other than that, I rest my case.
This is the typical thing he does on any debate about policy.
One at a time,
he goes right for the outrageous.
Governor Kasich, you have the floor. Governor, you will have a response, but I promised Governor Kasich he could respond. Can somebody attack me, please?
I mean, Ben Carson saying, can somebody attack me just so he has an opportunity to participate? Lewis, I mean, just a total gong show abortion, right? Just crazy. I couldn't tell you who won that thing. It just exposes to me, these people are all crazy. None of them deserve to be president.
Yeah, I just, it makes you wonder what the final debate is going to look like. I guess it depends on how things go.
Yeah.
But I just love that Carson is still in it. Yeah. I think he just enjoys being up there and getting to
Please attack me.
He gets to throw in one-liners here and there, and he's on the national stage. And
sells a few books.
Exactly.
All right. Now, this may come as a shock to you, but Republican New Jersey governor, failed Republican presidential candidate Chris Christie, has now endorsed Donald Trump. And this may come as a shock to you. I mean, he was never able to get his campaign going. He had some great takedowns of Marco Rubio. He had some big attack lines on Donald Trump being unqualified. He dropped out after what I think we can only call a totally flaccid showing at the New Hampshire primary. He has now endorsed Donald Trump. Let's play just a little bit of his big speech endorsing Trump, a guy who multiple times he said was not qualified to be president.
I've been on that stage. I've gotten to know all the people on that stage. And there is no one who is better prepared to provide America with the strong leadership that it needs, both at home and around the world, than Donald Trump. He is, looking at the 5 people on that stage last night, the clear standout, and the person who will do exactly what needs to be done to make America a leader around the world again. He'll provide strong, unequivocal leadership. He will do what needs to be done to protect the American people, first and foremost, both in the homeland and in creating jobs for this country. And he will make sure that people around the world know that America keeps its word again.
Yeah, this may be confusing to you because of the countless times that Chris Christie said under no circumstances would Trump be qualified to be president. In fact, I have a list of just a couple of these examples from recent months that I can show you here, which I believe we have, Lewis, for people to take a look at. Here's just a few examples. July 2015, we have to beware of Trump. August of 2015, Trump's a great guy but not suited to be president. September, Trump has to decide if he's even a serious candidate. In December, we don't need reality TV in the Oval Office. He called Trump too inexperienced to be president. And just last month, he said that Trump sits in his jammies in Trump Tower and phones in, and then he slammed Trump for acting like a 13-year-old. Hey, yeah, I take him seriously, Lewis. This is really the best guy to be president. And what this brings up a serious question, which is, were all of the attacks on Trump just political posturing because we know in reality Christie and Trump are kind of friends behind the scenes? Or were those criticisms real, but now Christie is just like desperate to be considered for VP or something like that? I don't know.
Yeah, I would assume that there's some type of deal in place here, whether it has something to do with an appointment or just, I don't know, maybe more development of Trump-related business in Jersey. I couldn't tell you for sure, but something is going on there.
And the problem is when you attack each other the way the Republicans have, then there's no credibility to kind of coalesce around the eventual nominee. Bernie Sanders has been very clear. He says, Hillary Clinton is a good person and someone I respect and have worked with. We have disagreements about certain political issues. Makes it much easier, no matter who is the eventual nominee, when that's the attitude, to say, hey, we have policy differences, but this is still clearly someone who's qualified and the best candidate that remains. There's no credibility as far as that goes on the Republican side. Now, I need to get to this. This is just probably the most pathetic moment so far in the entire Republican primary race. I mentioned that Chris Christie has now endorsed Donald Trump for president, even after time, just instituting brutal attack after brutal attack. This is probably the most humiliating moment I've ever seen of Chris Christie or of any major politician. He showed up at a Trump rally to introduce Trump as the next president of the United States. And then Trump, thinking he's off mic, walks over to Chris Christie and basically pats him and says, "Chris, go home. The plane's over there." And Christie just looks completely reduced. I mean, he just looks so small and pathetic after this. And then Trump starts speaking. I've got the audio here because the mic captured it. Maybe the most pathetic and humiliating moment of the campaign so far. Take a look.
So do I, and that's why I'm proud to introduce to you the next president of the United States, Donald Trump.
Here comes Trump, and listen carefully now. Listen very carefully. Get in the plane and go home. It's over there. Go home. This is too good, Lewis. This is in the top 3 pathetic moments for me during the campaign so far. The other 2 very quickly. Jeb Bush getting kicked off stage at a Rotary Club event so that they could go back to dealing with new business within the Rotary Club. Thinks about shaking people's hands. Nobody wants to shake his hands, so he goes back over to his seat and starts spooning goop into his tea. Take a look at this.
Thank you. They're kicking me out the door. They're kicking me out the door.
Governor, thank you very much for joining us today. I believe your schedule has a hard stop.
Yeah.
There are more than 1 million
Handshaking?
Rotarians around this globe.
Nobody wants handshaking.
And we all share
I'll go over
4
here.
tests that
I will
guide
sit
our daily
back down,
interaction
look around
with each other,
awkwardly,
with our friends, with our coworkers.
sit, and then I'm going
This
right for the
club has added
gloop.
a 5th
Here it is.
test.
Here's my
Before you
spoon.
run, I would invite all
And
you
let
to
me
join
just start
us.
spooning this
I will
stuff
gavel
right
the
in.
meeting
Somebody saying
closed
maybe it's honey for his
afterwards.
tea.
Ask-
Okay, and then the third contender for most pathetic moment so far is when Jeb Bush asked people to clap. I mean, there's not much better than that. Take a look.
So here's my pledge to you. I will be a commander-in-chief that will have the back of the military. I won't trash talk. I won't be a divider-in-chief or an agitator-in-chief. I won't be out there blowharding, talking a big game without backing it up. I think the next president needs to be a lot quieter, but send a signal that
he'll
we're
be quiet,
prepared
all right.
to act in the national security interests of this country, to get back in the business of creating a more peaceful world. Please clap.
Lewis, I go to you. Which of these 3 moments is the most pathetic and humiliating of the campaign?
Definitely getting as a presidential candidate getting kicked off stage at a Rotary Club meeting, I think is I can understand the clapping thing because like
People
we've said
were
before,
sleeping. I mean, you can't blame them. You can't clap if you're sleeping, right? I mean,
That's right. They're asleep. And I'm not 100%, although it sounded really bad with Christie and Trump.
Yeah.
He could have just been saying, "Hey, buddy, no need for you to stick around anymore.
Yeah.
There's the plane. Go home, relax."
Yeah.
But
it was weird.
It was weird.
It was like it was his little dog, and he was saying, "We're done. Thanks for fetching. Now get over into your dog bed." Okay, so I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. Lewis is on Twitter at @LewisMotomedy. And any thoughts on this? Let us know on Twitter.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Luann Kwan. Luann, thank you so much for signing up at davidpakman.com/membership. This is viewer-funded independent media. No huge corporations or big media conglomerates fund this show. We're funded mostly by you, the audience. So thank you so much to Luann Kwan, today's new member of the day. Join her and sample all of the exclusive member benefits at davidpakman.com/membership. Okay, you may have heard me say that if you ever shop on Amazon.com, the shopping you do can support the work we do If you go to davidpakman.com/Amazon before shopping, I recommend bookmarking the link and using it whenever you shop. Okay, Lewis, huge industrial-sized hand sanitizers being purchased through our link lately. I feel like hand sanitizer has become less of a thing. There was a period during which everybody was all about hand sanitizer constantly to avoid transmitting colds and germs and stuff like that. I don't see hand sanitizer around nearly as much anymore.
Well, in bathrooms, and frequently you will find it in my mom's car.
Ah, okay.
And that's really about it. Yeah, I think, well, what I learned a long time ago was that in the entire hand washing process, nothing removes more germs and whatever is on your hands than the actual just scrubbing of your hands with a hard, like a coarse paper towel.
Interesting. Yeah, and there's been a sort of antibacterial soap, antibacterial soap movement. The idea that, hey, if you're using that antibacterial stuff all the time, you're actually getting rid of good bacteria as well. You're less able to actually just fight off and defend yourself from germs, etc. And I've heard, Lewis, in some communities, the same idea about hand sanitizer. If you're constantly using that alcohol-based hand sanitizer, you're clearing your hands of everything, and that may not be that good in the long term for transmitting, for preventing germ transmission. Who knows? Also, a whole bunch of maternity stuff being purchased through our Amazon link. So congratulations, someone clearly having a baby, Lewis, or just likes buying maternity stuff, just, I don't know, for fashion purposes.
Could be as a gift, too, right?
Oh, I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
That's true. Could be as a gift. Well, whoever is having the baby,
they'll probably love it.
Congratulations. They'll probably love their kid. As Lewis has said, if he would accidentally have a kid, he would probably love the kid. Probably applies to people in our audience as well. All right, davidpakman.com/Amazon. Remember to stop there before you do any shopping on Amazon.com. All right, this controversy continues to build about Donald Trump and his taxes, right? The news last week was Mitt Romney coming forward and saying there is a bombshell in Donald Trump's tax returns. He must release those tax returns. Donald Trump has not released the tax returns. He says he's not sure if he will. And then during the last Republican debate, Donald Trump said the reason he hadn't released those 12 years of tax returns is because all 12 years have been under review by the IRS. He said, for many years, I've been audited every year, 12 years or something like that. So a few comments on this, and let's really be precise here. First of all, if it's true that your tax returns are under review by the IRS, that's not a reason not to release them. The IRS has made a statement saying, we don't comment about specific people's taxes, but when you are under review, that doesn't stop you from releasing your tax returns. Those are your tax returns, and you can release them if you want, period. But here's where it gets really interesting. According to various former IRS agents, it's very unusual to be under review or audited 12 years in a row. It's generally considered, Lewis, by the IRS, it's general practice that if you get reviewed and there's nothing wrong found, you don't get reviewed for a couple of years after that, typically 2 to 3 years. So the bombshell, aside from whatever is in the tax returns, we already have a bombshell, Lewis, which is if it's true that Donald Trump has been audited 12 years in a row, that is very, very odd because it would indicate that multiple years there are problems with his tax returns. That is in and of itself a bombshell.
I suppose it's maybe it's a bombshell to you, but is that going to be a bombshell to Trump supporters?
No, he could kill people. They'd still support
majority of the
him.
population. Yeah, I mean, he could kill someone, right, and his supporters would stick around.
Now, this is where it gets fantastic. After the debate, Donald Trump was interviewed by Chris Cuomo, and Chris Cuomo is visibly trying to restrain laughter when Donald Trump says maybe he's being audited by the IRS because he's a, quote, strong Christian. If you're watching along with us, watch Chris Cuomo's face when he says this. He can barely keep it together because, of course, this is so absurd.
I actually like debating.
They came at you tonight about something that's in the news right now that really is at your control, which is the tax returns.
Yeah.
Mitt Romney, during the debate, was bringing it up again. You could show him in a second if you want to. Why is Trump delaying?
Well,
what do you say?
Let me explain about Mitt. You know,
Please.
Mitt is a guy who was a horrible candidate. He lost a race that should have been won, and it should have been won easily. And I don't know what happened. He disappeared the last 2 months. But when Mitt gave his tax returns, just so you understand, it was about 6 months from now in 2012. It was 2012. It was exactly September 21st. And that's when he gave his tax return. We're in a different world. So, you know, Mitt is just trying to remain relevant. Nobody's talking to him much anymore. He got some publicity today. But the one problem I have is that I'm always audited by the IRS, which I think is very unfair. I don't know, maybe because of religion, maybe because of something else, maybe because I'm doing this, although this is just recently.
What do you mean religion?
Well, maybe because of the fact that I'm a strong Christian and I feel strongly about it, and maybe there's a bias.
You think maybe you get audited for being a strong Christian?
You see what's happened. I mean, you have many religious groups that are complaining about that. They've been complaining about it for a long time.
I need a screenshot, Lewis, of Chris Cuomo's eyes go huge. And he's visibly stunned by Donald Trump suggesting that his tax returns are being audited because he's a strong Christian. By the way, he says he's been audited 12 years in a row. He's been a strong Christian for about 12 weeks on record, right? How on earth would that explain being audited 12 years in a row when his Christianity seems to have popped up out of thin air like a science experiment 12 weeks ago?
Yeah, just throwing out some red meat. Yeah. He makes it sound like he runs a church or something like that. It's dumb.
The guy knows only 2 Corinthians. His entire group of religious friends is Pat Robertson and the 2 Corinthians he keeps talking about, and he's being audited because he's a strong Christian. I hand it to Chris Cuomo for keeping it together, Lewis. I would have not been able to in that situation.
Yes, and it would have been a great time to bring up Bible passages again, I think, just because that's always makes for a good soundbite.
He could have cited his favorite passage from the Bible and The Art of the Deal and just sort of do a compare and contrast. Like, here's my most important holy book, and then here's what's in the Bible, and just figure out what it is that's going on there. Okay, one more story before we go to break. As I've told you, Donald Trump has been catalyzing and coalescing some of the most rancid and putrid elements of American society, including white supremacists and all sorts of nativists and xenophobes. And he's been now endorsed by David Duke. He's former KKK leader, right? I don't know if he was like a grand leader or head witch in charge. I don't know what the ranks are there. But anyway, he was like a higher up in the KKK. Who knows what exactly was his position. He really likes Trump. He thinks Trump would, for example, quote, break up the Jewish-dominated lobbies and make sure that, quote, white Americans are allowed to preserve and promote their heritage and interests. Trump was asked about this on CNN, and he refused initially to disavow or denounce David Duke or disavow or denounce the KKK, sort of saying, I really haven't heard much about either of them, so how can I denounce something I don't know much about? Let's take a look at the video from that interview on CNN. Trump not handling this too well.
Condemn David Duke and say that you don't want his vote or that of other white supremacists in this election?
Well, just so you understand, I don't know anything about David Duke, okay? Right. I don't know anything about what you're even talking about with white supremacy or white supremacists. So
no clue.
I don't know. I mean, I don't
Never
know.
Heard of it.
Did he endorse me or what's going on? Because, I know nothing about David Duke. I know nothing about white supremacists. And so you're asking me a question that I'm supposed to be talking about people that I know nothing about.
But I guess the question from the Anti-Defamation League is, even if you don't know about their endorsement, there are these groups and individuals endorsing you. Would you just say unequivocally you condemn them and you don't want their support?
Well, I have to look at the group. I mean, I don't know what group you're talking about. You wouldn't want me to condemn a group that I know nothing about. I'd have to look. If you would send me a list of the groups, I will do research on them, and certainly I would disavow if I thought there was something wrong. But you may have groups in there that are totally fine, and it would be very unfair. So give me a list of the groups, and I'll let you know.
Okay. I mean, I'm just talking about David Duke and the Ku Klux Klan here, but...
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know David Duke. I don't believe I've ever met him. I'm pretty sure I didn't meet him, and I just don't know anything about him.
Okay, so I guess he doesn't know enough about the KKK. He hasn't really heard of that group. He says, I need to look at them. Maybe I want the KKK's endorsement. Maybe I don't. Now, even the David Duke thing is ridiculous. He does know David Duke. He certainly knows about him. In 2000, citing him, as well as Pat Buchanan and Lenora Fulani, in a statement that year, Trump explained why he had decided to end his brief flirtation with a Reform Party presidential campaign. He said the Reform Party now includes a Klansman, Mr. Duke, a neo-Nazi, Mr. Buchanan, and a communist, Ms. Fulani. This is not company I wish to keep. So that's bogus, unless he forgot. And number two, who doesn't know about the KKK at this point? Is it legitimate to say, hey, any group, I've got to research them because I just don't know about them? Couldn't you say, if you were ready, couldn't you just say, if you were willing politically, yeah, of course I disavow the KKK. And he has since backtracked. He says, yeah, I disavow David Duke. I've disavowed him in the past and blah, blah, blah. I don't want anything to do with it. But a real misstep in a sense. But I have a feeling that the 35% of the Republican Party that already supports Trump, they're not going to be swayed away because Trump embraces a David Duke endorsement if that is what he had done.
Yeah, probably not. I think I don't see what would have been wrong with his response if he said, I don't like anything they do. I don't like them. But if they want to vote for me, I'll take every vote I can get.
Sure.
Because when I'm in office, I won't stand for that stuff, whatever.
And I would be the
anything
president
wrong.
of everybody. I'd be the president. He could have turned it around in some more logical statement. Instead, he said today that he'd had trouble hearing the questions because he had a problem with his earpiece, which is just ridiculous because he said specifically, I don't know if I've met David Duke. I don't think I've met. He knew exactly who he was being asked about by Jake Tapper. How on earth could you blame a bad earpiece? What happens if you have a bad earpiece is you say, I don't know whose name you said, not I don't know who that person you mentioned is, who I clearly heard you say. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I hope now he's getting coached on how to better answer these types of questions.
Yeah.
But I say there's no shame in saying you'll take any vote from anyone. You don't have to agree with them personally or their policy or whatever, but and just stop the lying.
Stop the lying.
The evidence
Stop the
is out
nonsense.
there. People are going to prove you wrong. It's all over the internet. Just don't lie.
Let's take a break. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show. Post on there about what your thoughts are on this story.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to have economist Gerald Friedman, professor of economics at my alma mater, the economics department at the University of Massachusetts, back on the show. Jerry, we've been speaking to you for years about, what would it cost if we went to something like a single payer or Medicare for all healthcare plan system in the United States. We've been talking about the cost of a lot of different social welfare and other plans. And now that Bernie Sanders, as presidential candidate on the Democratic side, has been proposing some of these same ideas, people are going to you and you're explaining, hey, here's what this would cost, here's what that would cost. And this is not without controversy. Now even some self-described liberal economists are saying Bernie Sanders, Gerald Friedman, these people are understating what the cost is going to be of some of Bernie Sanders' proposals. So let's start sort of at the broadest point. What do you think is behind this disagreement as to your assessments of the cost of these plans?
Well, I think that there is a legitimate intellectual scholarly dispute about how much money could be saved through a universal program and how much extra cost would be incurred. And I'm just going to assume that those who disagree with me are following this legitimate, honest disagreement. The major critic of the Medicare for All program is an economist, Kenneth Thorpe at Emory. And Thorpe used to be a strong supporter of single payer. He was kind of me before my time because he proposed financing plans for single payer plans for Massachusetts, for Vermont, and for the entire United States. In about 10 years ago, he did this. And when he did that, he made estimates of the savings that are very consistent with the estimates that I've been doing and draw on the same sources. So, 10 years ago, we would have agreed. Now he is saying something different. His critique of my funding program for single payer Medicare for All basically has two areas of disagreement. The first is the savings. He assumes much, much less administrative savings from administrative waste than I assume. Basically, he assumes that we would continue to have an administrative burden on our health care that is twice what Canada has. So we would save only less than half of what I anticipate we would be able to save. And I'm not assuming that we would become as efficient as Canada, which has a single payer plan. So I'm already allowing for some waste, some greater waste in the United States. But he's assuming much, much greater waste. When questioned by, I've never spoken to him myself, but when questioned by a reporter, the reporter told me that Thorpe says, well, we couldn't achieve all that administrative savings because in the United States we'd still have to have much more medication review than is done in Canada. It's like, I don't understand why that would be the case, and I don't understand why it would cost as much as he's assuming. The difference is a matter of hundreds of billions of dollars a year. So, okay, so that's one area. The second area of disagreement, Thorpe assumes that when we do away with copays and deductibles, utilization of healthcare services will soar by about 30%. I'm assuming an increase of 10%. When Canada and Taiwan went to single payer plans in 1971 and 1995, respectively, they had increases in utilization of about 3%. So I'm already factoring in this idea that a lot of Americans are not able to go to the doctor now because of the cost of copays and deductibles. And when we do away with those, there'll be much more utilization of healthcare.
So it's sounding like you don't take issue with the sort of concepts he's bringing up, but you're saying you have accounted for those ideas and those possible increases in costs, and you just don't think that they will be as significant as Mr. Thorpe does.
Exactly. And there's an irony here, because if he really believes that copays and deductibles are keeping that many people from going to the doctor, then I think he would also have to agree that they are killing lots and lots of Americans. Because if people need to go to the doctor and can't because of the $50 copay or $30 copay or $2,000 deductible, then maybe we really need to move to do away with those so that people can go to the doctor when they need to.
Right, that's an interesting idea, right? Which is, on the one hand, we have to balance both sides of the equation. On the one hand, if he believes that the increase in utilization is going to be drastic, if he thinks so many people are not getting care because of the current copays and deductibles associated, we have to assume that there are huge systemic costs to those people eventually ending up in the emergency room or through the much more expensive ways that people ultimately get health care that we know exist in this country. And so that savings also has to be considered in the equation.
That's right. And worse, when people don't get care, they get sicker and they die. I estimate that 200,000 Americans die each year because they cannot afford to go to the doctor when they need to. And that is apart from the 70,000 a year who die because they don't have health insurance. So we've got a real problem here. And I think Thorpe is suggesting that the problem is even much greater than I'm saying. Or else, he's just kind of, putting that assumption in because, whatever. But those are the two major disagreements that we have. And you add them together, and he gets his estimate that Bernie Sanders' plan will cost $1 trillion a year more than I'm projecting, because there'll be less savings and there'll be more costs.
And there's another economist, right? Austin Goolsbee, formerly chairman of President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors, now at the University of Chicago. Let's sort of turn our attention to him a little bit. And his sort of general thing is the numbers don't remotely add up. That's a quote. He's talked about the trillions in spending that these plans would add. Is your sense that, he's not working for Hillary Clinton to the best of my knowledge currently. Is your sense that some of these critiques, be it Austin Goolsbee or other economists, are they politically motivated in some sense?
I have no idea, and I won't comment. I don't know why they're saying those things. Goolsbee draws on basically one source, which is Thorpe. The only critique of the healthcare plan, and when you're talking about Sanders' spending program, most of it is healthcare. The healthcare is the big one. We're going to be adding $1.4 trillion to $1.3 trillion in extra federal spending a year. That's just huge. Everything else is much, much smaller. So the healthcare plan is the only one that people have evaluated seriously. And Thorpe is the one who evaluated. And everybody who is criticizing from Hillary Clinton herself on down, everyone who's criticizing Sanders' healthcare plan is drawing on Thorpe. I think Thorpe is wrong. I think, he himself used to think different things than he's saying now. Goolsby's strong on thought. Goolsby's also just kind of throwing around names, saying things. Oh, unicorns and, puppies and rainbows.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I have a puppy, and my wife wanted to get him a little unicorn horn and paint a rainbow on him, and send the picture to Austin Goolsby. But I'd rather keep it from getting too personal.
In your heart of hearts, is this conversation a pragmatic one, or is it moot in the sense that even if Bernie Sanders is the eventual Democratic nominee, and even if Bernie Sanders is the eventual president of the United States, that Medicare for all will be a practically speaking non-starter? What's your sense of that?
Well, actually, I don't agree.
Okay.
I think that Medicare for all will be enacted, regardless of whether Bernie Sanders wins the primaries tomorrow or wins the presidency. It's the only way that we can control healthcare costs. And it's interesting, if you read Thorpe's little paper, he acknowledges that, because he says that over time, Medicare for all will slow the growth in healthcare spending. Every other country in the world has had slower growth in healthcare spending than we have. And the excess growth in healthcare spending in the United States is entirely because of higher prices for healthcare, because of the waste in our system from the growing administrative burden and the rising monopoly pricing of drugs and other medical services by monopoly big pharma and big hospitals. The only way to control administrative waste and the only way to control monopoly pricing is through a single payer program. So the only way that will be able to afford healthcare in the future is with a single payer program, and that we're going to come around to that eventually. So I think Senator Sanders' campaign has been a great help for the single payer movement, because we're having this dialogue. And Mahatma Gandhi had a phrase that first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then you win. There may be a couple of the steps in there. We're at I think we've actually moved past the laughing stage. And while Goolsby himself hasn't backed down from his mockery, the Romas, David and Christy Roma, have seriously engaged me in my analysis of the impact of his program in general, Senator Sanders' program in general. And I really disagree with them. I think they're wrong. They misunderstand the workings of the economy. But we are having a serious discussion about the capacity output growth, about what healthcare will really cost on the different alternatives, about how we can move to single payer. And I think this discussion is going to continue regardless. Senator Sanders' campaign has sparked it, and it will continue regardless of what happens to the senator. And we will adopt single payer.
All right. Well, I love your optimism, and of course hope you're absolutely right. We've been speaking with Professor of Economics at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, Massachusetts, Gerald Friedman. Always great to talk to you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, David.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I want to tell you a story about a full-grown man who thinks he could be president of the United States, who decided to throw an embarrassing and pathetic temper tantrum on Fox News. Ted Cruz went on Fox News. He thought the questions were too tough, the questions weren't fair, and he accused host Chris Wallace of working for the Trump campaign or reading Trump talking points. Chris Wallace smacked him down, and it did not go well at all for Ted Cruz. I have the video here. I have the audio. Let's take a look.
For you, and your campaign has been involved in a series of incidents that people are calling dirty tricks. I want to put up a list of them. In Iowa, the Cruz campaign sent out tweets saying Ben Carson was suspending his campaign. That was false. The campaign put out flyers accusing people of voting violations. That was false. In South Carolina, a Cruz super PAC attacked Trump over the Confederate flag, and your then communications director posted a link this week accusing Rubio of disrespecting the Bible. That was false. Question. Do you take personal responsibility? This was your campaign, except for the super PAC. Do you take personal responsibility for this series of incidents, and what does it say about the culture of the campaign you're running?
Chris, every accusation you raised there is incorrect. I appreciate your reading the Donald Trump attack file on that.
Oh, come on, sir.
Let me tell you, our campaign has been from the highest...
Wait a minute,
Chris,
sir.
let me answer. Please
You
don't
personally
interrupt me.
apologized to Ben Carson on
Chris,
a debate
please don't interrupt
stage.
me.
You fired your communications director.
Chris,
Don't
please
say
don't
this is an
interrupt me.
Oppo file on our part, sir.
Chris, please don't interrupt me. Our campaign from the beginning.
Please don't say that. Accuse me of something I didn't do.
Go ahead, Chris. Let me know when I'm allowed to answer.
Well, don't accuse me of doing something I didn't do. Two of those things, you apologized for one, and you fired your communications director. Don't say this is the Oppo file.
Chris, our campaign from the beginning has been the highest level of integrity. When others have engaged in personal attacks and insults, we don't respond in kind. And, you know, it was striking. You just had Donald Trump on the air. You didn't ask him about the fact that he sent out a fabricated quote from Tom Coburn impugning my integrity. Tom Coburn, Senator Coburn, came out and said it was an utter fabrication, and yet Donald continued repeating what he knew.
Wow. The questions you asked me are more difficult than the questions you asked Trump. I love it how Cruz says, none of what you're saying is true. I mean, yes, I fired one of my staffers for one of the things you mentioned, and I personally apologize for the other. Neither of those things happened. How else could this possibly have gone?
Yeah, I love how he calls his campaign the pinnacle of integrity or something like that. I mean, talk about, I don't know, Dave, something about it just every time he speaks.
Yeah, it's cringeworthy.
It's very cringeworthy.
This is just basic journalism, right? Hey, here's stuff you said, comment on that.
Mm-hmm.
What on earth is controversial about that? It is absolutely unbelievable. One thing I want to mention before we go to your voicemails is we've been going back and forth about whether this plan from Republicans to block President Obama's eventual Supreme Court nominee, who would be a replacement to the now late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, could it backfire? Could Republican voters see it as obstructionism, even beyond what we've become accustomed to from the Republicans? And there's a new poll from Bloomberg which suggests that the answer may be yes. 51% of Republicans do like the idea of blocking President Obama's eventual Supreme Court nominee. But 40% of Republicans don't like it. And it may not sound like a huge number, but consider that 40% of the Republicans voting, maybe altering their vote because of Republican obstructionism could have a huge, huge impact. If Republicans are barely winning over their own primary voters with this blockade, think about how this will impact the independent voters that will vote in greater numbers in the general election. I think, Lewis, that this very well could backfire for Republicans, and I hope it does. And at the same time, I hope that ultimately President Obama is able to do what he's been elected to do from January 2013 through January of 2017, which is when there are openings on the Supreme Court, you fill them. Very, very simple.
Yeah, I'm probably will backfire. I just don't know if it will backfire in such a significant way that, you know, there's a huge impact on the Republican Party because of it, or in votes coming up. But I just hope that Obama can do what he's legally able to do here.
Right.
Successfully. It looks like that may be very difficult, though.
The other thing to consider is that in the lead up to elections, we always hear voters saying, oh, lawmakers have just gone too far. They're going too far. We constantly hear about what a bad job our elected officials are doing, particularly in the House and Senate. And then the overwhelming majority of them get reelected anyway, because there is this attitude that, yeah, the House of Representatives is a disaster, but the person representing me is not really the problem. It's everybody else, and there's this just reelect them mentality that often happens. So this is a risk for Republicans. The poll demonstrates that, but we'll see ultimately if Republican voters actually hold these lunatics to task for what they are doing here, which is clearly politically motivated, clearly without any real historical precedent, as I've told you about many, many times. And I'm holding out hope that it will backfire for the Republican establishment that is pushing this. We have a voicemail number. The number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Take a listen to this, see if we can figure out what's going on here.
Hey, what's up, guys? And Louis, sometimes you be wrong in a whole lot of things, but that's another story. Sometimes I don't know whose side you're on, but that's another story. That's a story. You have to put David sometimes in check. Sometimes he be an a-hole and wrong on a lot of things, especially about girls and so on. So you got to put him in check. Put his ass in check.
Yeah.
When he
Okay. So a little too close to the microphone. It sounded like he had something where you're supposed to put me in check because I'm off base about something, but we weren't able to hear a word of it because it was popping peas and just crazy noise. I think you have to hold the phone a little far away. I'd be curious to know what that was about. It sounded interesting.
It did. Unfortunately, we don't have clarity this evening.
No. And I always seek to have that. So maybe call back in, hold the phone a little bit further because if Lewis should be putting me in check about something, I would absolutely love to know what. On the bonus show, reformists win all 30 seats in Iran. Big story. Big story. We will talk about it. Stray dogs in Turkey. We will talk about that. We will also talk about testing job applicants like a pro. I really like this. I'm always interested in hearing interesting interviewing techniques, and that includes both on air and for job interviews. And there's something really interesting Lewis is going to tell us about on the bonus show. DavidPakman.com/membership. That's the one way to get instant access to the world famous but very exclusive bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.